Hi everyone, my name's Amber and I'm an educator at the Museum of Modern Art, or MoMA, in New York City, and I want to welcome you to Collage Self-Portraits. So at MoMA we have lots of different types of artwork, from drawings to paintings, photographs to sculptures, video works, and so much more. Today we're going to look at and talk about collages. So collage is a technique in which pieces of paper and other materials are arranged and glued to a surface. I like collage because it's a great chance to experiment by mixing different shapes and colors, techniques and materials to create something new. So in this workshop, we're focusing on self-portraits, which are images that artists create of themselves. As you'll see with the works we'll look at today, self-portraits can look lots of different ways. During our time together, we're going to view 3 self-portraits that incorporate collage, and then we're going to have some time to work on our own self-portraits. Self-portraiture is really special because it gives us the opportunity to tell our stories from our perspectives. Creating portraits of ourselves allows us to authentically reflect different parts of who we are and the things that are important to us. I'm so excited to dig into these works with you, but before we start looking at and making art, let's do a quick materials check. You'll want to have a few sheets of paper, a pencil, scissors, glue, and a selection of materials that you can cut up and use. This could be magazines, newspapers, fabric, stickers, whatever you have around. It's also great to have paint, markers, colored pencils, or any other art supplies you might want to use. Feel free to pause the video if you need to grab your materials or if you need a break at any time. The first self-portrait we're going to view is by an artist named Margot Humphrey, who you see here. Humphrey is an American artist who was born and raised in Oakland, California, near San Francisco. In this photo of the artist, she has light brown skin and chin-length wavy hair, and she's wearing a white shirt. She's sitting at a table, leaning over a piece of paper that she's drawing on. This is Margot Humphrey's self-portrait, which is titled "The History of Her Life Written Across Her Face." Let's take a few moments to look. A simple illustration of the artist's head, neck, and shoulders takes up most of the frame. The artist has black skin and orange hair, and there are words and colorful symbols on her body, from her forehead down to her shoulders. What details do you notice in this self-portrait? Something that I noticed was that there's a small cross on each of the artist's shoulders. This work is an interesting example of collage because it's sort of hard to tell that it is a collage. The base of this artwork is a lithograph, a type of print, with some small collage additions, including the cross on the right side of the work. The cross on the left of the artist is solid yellow, but the cross on the right is golden shiny. That's because the artist used gold leaf, which is gold that has been hammered into thin sheets. I wanted to share this portrait with you because the way the artist used words might inspire your own self-portrait. In this work, artist Margot Humphrey uses a combination of words and pictures or symbols to create a sort of puzzle or code. And the answer to the puzzle is about halfway down the work on the left side within the artist's hair. It looks like it could be a sticky note. Let's get a little closer so we can see these details better. According to that answer key, the translation of the first line here is, "It was in the spring of 1979 that she first flew to New York City to see art." Notice that the artist uses an airplane instead of writing the word flew, an illustration of the Statue of Liberty instead of just writing out New York City, and an illustration of a framed artwork here in place of the word art. So Margot Humphrey is using her self-portrait here to tell us about a specific time in her life, which you might want to consider doing in your self-portrait. The artist used language in her self-portrait by creating this puzzle, but there are lots of other ways to incorporate text into your self-portrait. For example, you could just write things out on your portrait, like words, phrases, lyrics, or poetry. or you could cut words out of magazines or newspapers and include them. Let's do a quick writing activity to start thinking about how language can inform our self portraits. Use the next minute or two to make a list of words or phrases that either describe you or reflect things that are important to you. You may want to write these words in your final self portrait, or you may just want to use them as inspiration. The point of this exercise is to get your creative juices flowing and get you thinking about what information you might want to convey about yourself through your self portrait. Grab a pencil and paper and start making your list. See if you can come up with at least 5 words. Pause the video while you work and press play when you finish your list of words. Hopefully by now, you have a list of words to inspire your self-portrait. I'll share a few words that I included on my list. The first one is nature, because I love being outdoors, and lately I've been trying to spend more time in nature instead of on screens. The second word I included is change, because like many of you, my life has changed a lot during the pandemic, and it's going to continue to shift over the next year. So for my self-portrait, I was thinking about both who I am in this very moment and who I will be in the future. Now, we've thought a little about the use of words and symbols in self-portraiture, and you've come up with some words and phrases that can inspire your self-portrait. Now let's move on to our next artwork and start thinking about the kinds of imagery that artists use in self-portraits. This is a photo of Benny Andrews, the artist who created our next self-portrait, called Portrait of a Collagist. He has light skin and light brown kinky hair, and he's wearing paint-stained jeans and a white shirt. Andrews is sitting on a stool, and there are artworks in progress on the wall behind him. Benny Andrews was an artist from the American South. He has said that he began to use collage when he was growing up because his family didn't have much money. Incorporating different found materials into his work gave him a way to get creative without having to buy a bunch of new materials. The portrait of Benny Andrews that we're going to look at today is in the collection of the Detroit Institute of Arts, but MoMA also has several works by the artist in our collection. In this self-portrait, we see Andrews, with gray hair and facial hair, standing with his body facing a canvas on the wall. His head is turned toward us. He's holding a palette with many different colors of paint, and there's a cardboard box full of fabrics at his feet. He's wearing a vest and paint-stained jeans. Let's look a little closer. In this close-up, you may be able to see that Andrews has incorporated fabrics into his self-portrait, which is something that he does often in his work. Take a look at the artist's left or front pant leg. Both of those pockets are actual denim that he cut out of old jeans and adhered to the canvas. This example might be difficult to see on a screen, but when you view the work in person, it adds an interesting textural element to what is otherwise a two-dimensional or flat artwork. When you're working on your self-portrait, think about the textures of the materials you're using and how you can add some interesting texture to your work. The two artworks that we viewed show us that collage can be subtle, simply adding another material to create texture or meaning. Let's talk a little about the setting of this work, or where it takes place. What details did the artist choose to include? Andrews depicts himself at work in his studio. The room is pretty bare, but we can see that the artist included 2 clues about what's important to him: his artwork and his materials. Keep this in mind for your own self-portrait. So that's a little bit about the artist's technique and materials. Finally, I wanted to share with you a glimpse of Benny Andrews' process. We know that there's no one right way to make art, but we also know that Benny Andrews' process included sketching out his work, like you can see here on the right. Let's try to use the same process as we think about our own portraits. Grab whatever piece of paper you're planning to use as the background for your collage and start sketching out the basic details of your self-portrait. Be sure to do this in pencil so that you have the option to change things later on. And make sure you use a large sheet of paper so that you're able to arrange things on top later. A regular sheet of construction paper works just fine. While you're brainstorming, consider whether you'll show your entire body, like Benny Andrews, or if you'll focus on your face, like Margot Humphrey. Consider what you'll include in your self-portrait to show who you are and what's important to you. Maybe you might want to show yourself doing a specific thing that you love, like Andrews did. The sketch can be as simple or as detailed as you want. You're the artist, and you make the decisions about your self-portrait. Think about this sketch as the base of your collage, but know that it can always change. This is the sketch that I did for my self-portrait. I drew a basic outline of myself in the middle. Then I drew a city skyline on one side of me because I live in New York City, and I drew trees on the other side of me to show my love of nature. I chose to make this sketch pretty simple for now, and I'll add in more details later. Now pause the video to work on your sketch, then come back and press play when you're ready to move on. Hopefully by now you have some idea of what your self-portrait might look like. Now let's move on to the third and final artwork we're going to view before we assemble our self-portraits. The final self-portrait we'll look at today is by the artist Njideka Akunyili-Crosby, who was born in Nigeria but has lived in the US since she was 16 years old. This is a photo of the artist. She's a brown-skinned woman wearing a colorful head wrap and a black shirt. She's turned away from us, focused on a work in progress on the wall in front of her. She's painting an area outlined by blue tape. There are also lots of images taped to the work. You can see a little glimpse of Akunyili-Crosby's process in this photo. Look at the work in progress. She's used blue tape to section off different parts of the work so that she can work on it one section at a time. There are also a few sheets of paper hanging up on the wall that, to me, seems like they might be showing different layers of the work. This is the final artwork I wanted to show you. It's a self-portrait of the artist, but also includes her husband. The work is called "And We Begin to Let Go." Let's take a few seconds to look. In this work, we see a depiction of the artist wearing turquoise high heels sitting on a chair. Her husband is wearing bright orange pants, and we can see just a glimpse of the fair skin on his arm. The chair, floor, and the artist's husband's upper body are all made out of lots of tiny collaged images. What's one thing that draws your attention as you view this work? Clearly, there's a lot going on in this self-portrait. Let's look a little closer. If we look at the artist's body, we can see that she's painted her face and arms in beautiful shades of brown. She's also painted these deep blue and green plants in the background, including palm fronds from palm trees and plumeria, a type of flower. Both of these plants are found in the East Los Angeles neighborhood that the artist lives in. Let's look at a different part of the work. If we look closely at the floor, we can see that it's made up of a ton of different images, many of which are of people. A lot of Akunyili-Crosby's work is autobiographical, meaning it's about her and her own life, and the materials she chooses are a big part of that. She often uses photos from her family photo albums in her work, and she also includes references to her life and identity. For example, those plants in the background that told us about where she lives. All of the collaged elements in the floor here are references to Nigerian pop culture from when the artist was growing up. So she's including pieces from her life in America and her life in Nigeria, and she's giving us information about all of these different parts of who she is, while creating a rich setting for her self-portrait. When you're working on your self-portrait, remember how this artist incorporated these special materials and images into her work. Think about the materials that you choose and what they might communicate about you or your life. Before you start working, I want to show you the self-portrait that I made. You might remember earlier when I mentioned the words nature and change. Here you can see how I included those in my final work. On the left side of my self-portrait, there's a collage by the artist Romare Bearden depicting a city sidewalk scene. This came from a postcard that I cut up. You might remember the city skyline I drew in my sketch. Here, I decided to cut a skyline out of black paper and draw on it with a silver marker. Soon I'll be moving closer to nature, so I've included an image of a forest on the right side to show how I'm transitioning from one part of my life to another. I happened upon the phrase, "nature is waiting," in a magazine and thought it would be perfect for my self-portrait, so I cut it out and glued it among the trees. There's a depiction of me from the shoulders up in the middle of the collage. I was inspired by Margot Humphrey's use of gold leaf and decided to make my afro out of sparkly gold paper. My shoulders are made out of an old holiday card I cut up. Start the next phase of your collage making by looking through your own materials and finding a few pieces you might want to use. Definitely get creative and experiment with different materials. Maybe you love this one candy bar and you happen to have a wrapper lying around. You could incorporate that into your collage. I actually cut up a cereal box to use as my skin in my self-portrait. Maybe you have old postcards or greeting cards like I did. Play around with those too. When you're ready, start arranging materials on top of your sketch to build your collage. As you design, think about the techniques that we talked about today and try some or all of them. Use text to add the element of language to your self-portrait, like Margot Humphrey did. Add drawn, painted, or cut out elements to show where you're from or where you live, like Njideka Akunyili Crosby with the plants of East LA. Show yourself doing something you love, like Benny Andrews did when he depicted himself painting in his studio. Consider texture when choosing your materials, like the fabric that Benny Andrews included in his work. Incorporate drawing, coloring, or painting in addition to cut paper, like all of the artists whose work we viewed today did. When you're satisfied with your arrangement, glue the materials down on your background. Remember, you do not have to finish your self-portrait in one sitting. You can always just start it now and come back to it at another time. When I was working on my self-portrait, I came back to it 2 or 3 times because I kept finding new materials or thinking of different ideas. When you're done with your collage, please share it with us. You can email photos of your self-portrait to myartwork@moma.org or share your work on Twitter and tag @MoMA Learning.